there is a quiet war being fought in the world of collectibles. It is not a battle you will see on the evening news, and it is not one fought with armies. Instead, it is a war waged with printers, scanners, and an unsettling level of craftsmanship. It is the war against counterfeit Pokémon cards, and whether you are a casual fan, a dedicated collector, or an investor with thousands of dollars tied up in graded slabs, you are already part of it. Pokémon, the franchise that began as a humble Game Boy game in the mid-1990s, has grown into a global cultural phenomenon. With more than 50 billion cards printed worldwide, the Pokémon trading card game is not just a hobby, it is an economy. And in any thriving economy, there will always be those who exploit it. The counterfeiters have been here almost as long as the cards themselves. The earliest known fake Pokémon cards began appearing in the late 1990s, just a few short years after the very first base set hit store shelves. These were crude by today's standards, grainy print quality, off-color inks, and often laughably incorrect text. Yet, for many children trading cards on the playground, they were convincing enough. They had Pikachu's face. They had the word Pokémon printed on the back. That was all it took. For many kids, discovering that a prized holographic Charizard was fake came not from expert authentication, but from a friend pointing out something odd, energy symbols that did not match the real set, or an attack name that simply did not exist in the official game. Sometimes it was more obvious, a war turtle with 500 hit points, or a move that claimed to destroy all your opponent's cards instantly. These were not subtle forgeries. They were playground curiosities, more amusing than threatening. But those early playground fakes planted the seed for something far more organized. As the years passed, counterfeiters evolved. When Wizards of the Coast handed over the Pokémon license to the Pokémon Company International in 2003, a new era of card printing began, and so did a new era of fakes. Printers became cheaper. Scanning technology improved. Home computers were now capable of producing counterfeit cards that, at first glance, could fool even a trained eye. By the mid-2000s, fake Pokémon cards were no longer just an occasional annoyance. They were showing up in flea markets, corner shops, and even the occasional questionable listing on online auction sites. And with the rise of e-commerce, the problem expanded at a speed no one was truly prepared for. Sites like eBay became both a blessing and a curse for collectors. On one hand, they offered access to cards from around the world. On the other, they provided counterfeiters with a direct pipeline to unsuspecting buyers. Early fake card sellers often operated with little fear of consequences. Enforcement was inconsistent, and the global nature of the internet meant that shutting down one seller in the United States did not stop a dozen more from emerging in other countries. A package arriving from overseas might contain the grail card a collector had been searching for, or it might be a worthless imitation, printed for pennies and sold for hundreds. The counterfeiters did not just copy common cards. They targeted the most desirable ones: holographic Charizards, tournament promos, and rare Japanese exclusives. Some were obvious fakes, printed on thin paper stock with washed-out colors. But others were dangerously close to the real thing. They had proper thickness, convincing shine, and sometimes even textured finishes that mimicked official Pokémon releases. And here is the truth most collectors do not want to hear: every single time the legitimate Pokémon card printing process improves, so does the counterfeiting industry. It is an arms race, and both sides are getting better. That is why, if you are a collector today, you cannot simply rely on "it looks real" anymore. You need to know what is happening in this ongoing battle, because it affects the authenticity, the value, and the trust behind every card in your collection. In this investigation, we will explore where counterfeiting began, how it evolved, and why it has become one of the most persistent threats to the Pokémon hobby. We will uncover the techniques counterfeiters use, the markets they exploit, and the red flags that can save you from losing hundreds or even thousands of dollars. We will also pull back the curtain on the grading industry, the so-called final safeguard against fakes, to see just how secure your prized slabs really are. But before we look at the cutting-edge forgeries of today, we have to go back. Back to where it all started, when Pokémon was still new, and the idea of a fake card was more novelty than threat. In those early years, counterfeiting was often a game of quantity over quality. Forgers were not investing in perfect replicas, they were printing in bulk, flooding local markets, and relying on the fact that most buyers were children who did not know any better. Cheap, glossy card stock was run through desktop inkjet printers, producing colors that bled or smudged with the slightest touch. Fonts were mismatched, energy symbols were misaligned, and the Pokémon logo on the card back often looked slightly too thin or too thick. But even crude fakes had an impact. They undermined trust. If you were burned once, you might think twice before trading for a high-value card again. And that hesitation and seed of doubt was something counterfeiters exploited. They knew collectors did not have the tools to verify every card on the spot. All they needed was to make their fakes good enough to pass during a quick trade or online sale. By the mid-2000s, the tools were changing. Higher resolution scanners meant counterfeiters could capture official card artwork with surprising clarity. Professional grade printers became more accessible, producing sharper images and more consistent color saturation. Even small-time forgers could order card stock online that mimicked the thickness of genuine Pokémon cards. One of the earliest major counterfeit upgrades came with the introduction of fake holographic foils. At first, they were easy to spot cheap rainbow patterns that looked nothing like Pokémon's official holo design. But it did not take long for counterfeiters to find foil stock that was closer to the real thing. Some even experimented with layering techniques, printing the card artwork on transparent sheets and placing them over reflective foil backgrounds to mimic the shimmer of authentic cards. Around this time, collector communities began to take action. Forums and early YouTube channels started producing how to spot a fake guides. They pointed out details like the official Pokémon card's unique blue border tone, the exact placement of copyright text, and the texture of the card stock when rubbed between your fingers. For the first time, information about identifying counterfeits was spreading quickly, but so too was the counterfeiter's ability to adapt. One of the simplest yet most effective tests to emerge was the light test. Genuine Pokémon cards have a specific layering process that includes a black inner layer, sometimes called the rosette or blue core depending on the region and print run. When held up to a strong light, authentic cards do not let light pass evenly through the center. That inner layer blocks it. Many fakes, especially those printed on standard paper stock, glowed like tracing paper under the same test. Another method was the bend test. A real card, when bent carefully, tends to spring back into shape without permanent creasing because of its specific fiber composition. Cheap counterfeits often cracked or split along the edges after a single bend. While these tests were not perfect and sometimes risky for high-value cards, they became standard tools for seasoned collectors. But as these techniques gained popularity, counterfeiters adapted yet again. They sourced better card stock, adjusted color profiles to more closely match official printing, and even experimented with artificial texturing to fool tactile inspections. Some began producing cards so close to authentic that the average collector would struggle to tell the difference without magnification or side-by-side comparison. This escalation marked the first real turning point in the counterfeiting war. The days of obvious, laughable fakes were fading. What emerged instead were forgeries that could deceive experienced traders, cards capable of slipping into collections, being sold at market value, and even, in rare cases, making it past professional grading companies. And that is where the stakes began to rise. A counterfeit card was no longer just a harmless novelty. It was a financial weapon, one that could drain bank accounts, undermine trust in sellers, and destabilize the entire secondary market. To understand how we got to that point, we have to examine the counterfeiter's next evolution. The move from amateur operations to organized, large-scale production. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, Pokémon card counterfeiting had shifted from being a hobbyist crime to a professional enterprise. No longer confined to back rooms and home printers, large-scale operations began emerging in regions where enforcement was weak and manufacturing costs were low. Entire facilities were devoted to producing fake trading cards, not just Pokémon, but Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, The Gathering, and other popular games. These counterfeit hubs operated with assembly line efficiency. Industrial offset printers churned out thousands of cards per hour, using high-quality inks that closely matched Pokémon's official color profiles. Precision die-cut machines replicated the exact rounded corners of genuine cards. Some operations even used multi-layer cardstock with a black core to mimic the light-blocking properties of authentic prints. The difference between these counterfeits and the real thing was narrowing at an alarming rate. For the first time, counterfeiters were producing entire booster packs shrink-wrapped, barcoded, and complete with fake foil wrappers that imitated legitimate packaging down to the crinkle. Some packs even contained a mix of real and fake cards, making detection more difficult. Unsuspecting buyers could open a pack, see familiar commons and uncommons, and assume that the holographic rare inside was authentic even if it was not. The internet acted as a global marketplace for these products. Online platforms and international shipping meant that a batch of fakes printed in one country could be in the hands of a collector halfway across the world in just days. Sellers often disguised these transactions by mixing counterfeit cards with genuine bulk lots, marketing them as used collections or garage sale finds to avoid immediate suspicion. The growing sophistication of these fakes began to challenge even the so-called ultimate safeguard, the professional grading companies. Collectors trusted services like PSA, Beckett, and CGC to authenticate their cards before sealing them in tamper-proof cases. The theory was simple: if a card was graded, it was real. But theory does not always match reality. Reports began surfacing of counterfeit cards slipping past grading company authentication checks. While rare, these incidents shook the community. The problem was not necessarily incompetence, it was that some counterfeits were so well made that even trained graders had to rely on the same detection methods as collectors: magnification, texture analysis, and comparison to known genuine examples. A single oversight could result in a fake card being sealed in a legitimate slab, instantly multiplying its market value. These high-profile mistakes were gold for counterfeiters. Not only could they sell ungraded fakes to casual buyers, but now they could attempt to get them encapsulated, turning a worthless imitation into a slab gem mint collectible worth hundreds or even thousands. Once inside a tamper-proof case, the card's authenticity was rarely questioned again. The fallout from these incidents was twofold. First, collectors began demanding more transparency from grading companies about their authentication processes. Second, counterfeiters doubled down, investing in even better materials and printing techniques. It was no longer enough to fool a casual collector at a convention table. The goal now was to fool the most experienced eyes in the industry. And while grading companies quietly adjusted their procedures, counterfeiters were already moving to the next phase, targeting not just individual cards, but entire product lines, with mass-produced fake booster boxes and counterfeit special edition sets. This was the moment the counterfeit Pokémon card industry stopped being a niche threat and became a global black market. The arrival of the 2020s brought with it a perfect storm for counterfeit Pokémon cards. The COVID-19 pandemic had millions stuck indoors, nostalgia was driving unprecedented demand, and Pokémon's 25th anniversary was reigniting global interest in the hobby. Prices skyrocketed. Base set Charizards were selling for more than some used cars. Sealed booster boxes, once gathering dust in closets, were now fetching thousands at auction. For counterfeiters, it was the ideal environment. And this time, they were not just relying on outdated printing techniques. They had access to commercial-grade equipment, high-resolution scanning tools, and digital color matching that could replicate official print runs with unnerving accuracy. Many of the new wave of counterfeits were so convincing that they could pass casual inspection even by seasoned collectors. Under normal room lighting, and without direct comparison to a genuine card, the differences were almost invisible. Social media poured fuel on the fire. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram made it easier than ever for sellers, both legitimate and shady, to reach massive audiences instantly. Videos of pack openings, mystery box sales, and so-called garage sale hauls drew in millions of viewers. But in the unregulated world of online video sales, counterfeiters found fertile ground. A seller could advertise a stack of rare cards in a flashy live stream, ship them out to eager buyers, and vanish before the fakes were ever detected. TikTok scams became a particularly fast-moving threat. Short-form videos allowed sellers to showcase supposed high-value pulls without giving viewers enough time to scrutinize details. Low camera quality, selective angles, and strategic lighting hid the subtle tells of counterfeit printing. Buyers, caught up in the excitement and scarcity, would send money through quick-pay apps without a second thought. By the time the cards arrived and suspicions arose, the seller's account was often deleted. Counterfeiters also began targeting modern sealed products. Fake booster boxes, especially of popular sets like Evolving Skies and Shining Fates, flooded the market. Some were sold through online marketplaces at prices just low enough to seem like a good deal without triggering immediate suspicion. Others were bundled into so-called investment lots alongside genuine products to disguise the fakes. These boxes often contained convincing outer packaging but were filled with counterfeit packs, each loaded with high-rarity cards that were themselves fraudulent. Technology played a dual role in this evolution. On one hand, counterfeiters leveraged advanced graphic design software to recreate card layouts down to the pixel. On the other, AI-driven quality control tools meant they could scan their own fakes, compare them to high-resolution images of genuine cards, and adjust their print settings to get even closer to the real thing. In some cases, counterfeit holographic patterns were replicated so precisely that even direct side-by-side comparisons required magnification to spot inconsistencies. For collectors, this created a minefield. The traditional quick tests checking weight, examining borders, performing light or bend tests were no longer guaranteed to expose a fake. Some modern counterfeits used layered card stock with a genuine black core, making the light test unreliable. Others matched the weight of official cards to within fractions of a gram, defeating digital scales. Even texture, once a reliable indicator, could be artificially embossed to mimic the feel of authentic foils. Grading companies, already under pressure from past authentication failures, responded by introducing stricter intake protocols. Some began using ultraviolet light analysis, microscopic surface scanning, and spectrophotometry to detect subtle differences in ink composition. These measures raised the bar, but they also lengthened turnaround times and increased costs, creating frustration among collectors and dealers. Meanwhile, counterfeiters were watching closely, adjusting their production processes to evade these very checks. The counterfeit industry was no longer reactive, it had become predictive. Sellers anticipated which upcoming sets would see the most hype and prepared counterfeit runs in advance, ready to flood the market at peak demand. They monitored grading company policies, collector forum chatter, and social media trends to fine-tune their deception. The battle between authenticity and forgery had entered a new phase, one where speed, precision, and information control mattered more than ever. And as this arms race accelerated, one question began to loom over the community: if fakes could get this close to perfection, how long before they became indistinguishable from the real thing, even for experts? The answer, for some collectors, was already uncomfortably close. In recent years, the concept of the superfake has entered the vocabulary of the Pokémon card community. These are not your average counterfeits, they are precision-engineered forgeries designed specifically to bypass the most rigorous authentication processes in the industry. A superfaked card is not meant to fool a child trading in the schoolyard, it is built to slip past professional graders, enter the market sealed in a legitimate slab, and circulate for years without suspicion. The rise of superfakes is directly tied to the weaknesses and human limitations of grading companies. While authentication protocols have improved, they are still largely dependent on trained staff making judgment calls under time pressure. A grader might inspect dozens, even hundreds, of cards in a single shift. In that environment, a well-made fake with just the right balance of authenticity cues can pass. Counterfeiters understand this all too well. They have studied the lighting conditions used by grading facilities, the magnification levels of standard inspection tools, and even the typical handling sequence of cards during intake. Some superfakes are deliberately engineered with micro-imperfections, tiny print dots, faint edge wear, or light surface scratches to make them appear not just authentic, but authentically handled. A perfect card can sometimes raise suspicion, a card with believable signs of age and play often does not. One of the most disturbing developments in the superfakes market has been the replication of security features once thought untouchable. Certain Pokémon promos, for example, contain unique embossing patterns, specific foil layering, or even hidden ink markings only visible under certain wavelengths of light. Today's high-end counterfeiters have found ways to replicate these features with alarming accuracy using advanced foil stamping, chemical ink treatments, and laser etching. The result is a counterfeit that, under casual inspection, passes with flying colors and even under professional scrutiny, may require highly specialized lab equipment to confirm as fake. Few grading companies have the resources or time to run such in-depth analyses on every card they receive. Loopholes in the grading system compound the problem. Some counterfeiters exploit bulk submission deals, sending in dozens or even hundreds of cards at once. With time pressure mounting, graders may focus more on speed than depth of inspection. Others take advantage of lower-tier grading services with less rigorous authentication standards, obtaining a slab and then cracking it open to resubmit the same card to a premium grader now with the implicit credibility of having been graded before. Once slabbed, a superfake card enters what collectors call the forever loop. It can be bought, sold, and traded for years without anyone questioning its legitimacy. Each sale cements its market value, and each passing year distances it from the moment of deception. By the time doubts surface if they ever do, the trail has gone cold, and the counterfeit has effectively become part of the market's accepted inventory. The financial implications are staggering. A single successful superfake Charizard could be worth thousands. Multiply that by dozens or hundreds of cards, and you are looking at an illicit trade worth millions annually. For counterfeiters, the profit margins are enormous. The cost to produce a high-end fake can be as little as a few dollars. The potential resale value? Sometimes 100 times that. And it is not just trophy cards that are at risk. Mid-tier rares, competitive play staples, and even bulk holos have been targeted. The logic is simple: the less scrutiny a card is likely to face, the easier it is to slip into circulation unnoticed. By the time a collector realizes their card is fake, it may have passed through several hands, each further insulating the original counterfeiter from exposure. For the community, the danger is existential. If enough superfakes flood the market, trust erodes. Collectors may hesitate to buy high-value cards altogether, dealers may tighten their trade policies, and grading companies may face mounting pressure to overhaul their systems entirely. This could lead to higher costs, longer wait times, and a chilling effect on the secondary market. And yet, despite the risks, there is no sign the counterfeit industry is slowing down. If anything, it is accelerating, fueled by global demand, rising card values, and the constant cat-and-mouse dynamic between forgers and authenticators. The question is not whether superfakes will continue to appear. It is how close they will come to being truly undetectable. Which leads to the final chapter of this investigation: what happens next. Because the future of Pokémon collecting may depend not just on catching fakes, but on rethinking what authenticity means in a hobby under siege. If the last 3 decades have taught us anything, it is that the counterfeit Pokémon card market is not a passing nuisance. It is an evolving, adaptive, and highly profitable industry that thrives in the shadows of our hobby. And as the technology to produce fakes becomes more sophisticated, the challenge of preserving authenticity will only grow. The road ahead is not without hope, but it demands a coordinated effort. Grading companies, marketplaces, manufacturers, and collectors all have roles to play in protecting the integrity of the game we love. This begins with transparency. Professional grading services must move beyond vague assurances and open their authentication processes to public scrutiny. Not every detail can be disclosed that would only arm counterfeiters further, but enough must be shared to rebuild trust. Next, there is the question of technology. In an age where counterfeiters are using artificial intelligence to perfect their forgeries, the Pokémon Company and its partners must meet that threat with equal force. Advanced digital watermarking, microtext security printing, and encrypted QR-based authenticity checks could all become standard in the future. Imagine scanning a card with your phone and receiving an instant verification from an official database, the kind of real-time security measure that makes counterfeiting vastly more difficult. Marketplaces must also accept greater responsibility. Online platforms remain the single largest distribution channel for counterfeit cards, and yet enforcement is often reactive rather than proactive. Artificial intelligence-driven image recognition could help identify and flag suspicious listings before they ever go live. Sellers caught trafficking fakes should face permanent bans across interconnected platforms, cutting off their access to buyers. For collectors, education remains the strongest weapon. The more you know about the look, feel, and structure of genuine cards, the harder it becomes for counterfeiters to deceive you. This does not just mean memorizing spotting techniques, it means keeping pace with the evolving tactics of the other side. Following trusted community voices, participating in collector forums, and sharing your own experiences can make a measurable difference. But the reality is that the arms race will never truly end. For every new detection method, counterfeiters will work to find a way around it. For every security feature, there will be an attempt to replicate it. The goal, then, is not to eliminate counterfeiting entirely, that may be impossible, but to make it costly, risky, and unappealing enough to deter all but the most determined. And this is where the philosophy of collecting itself may have to change. In a market where the possibility of a fake can never be reduced to zero, collectors may need to think more critically about provenance, the history of a card's ownership. Documented purchase records, photos, and grading certificates may become just as important as the card itself. The concept of value could shift away from just the physical object and toward the trust embedded in its story. The stakes are higher than they have ever been. The Pokémon trading card game is not just cardboard, it is history, nostalgia, art, and for many, a personal connection to childhood. Every fake card erodes that connection. Every undetected forgery chips away at the shared trust that makes this hobby thrive. And so, the fight continues. Somewhere right now, a counterfeiter is adjusting a color profile, testing a new foil pattern, or cutting a fresh batch of cards. Somewhere else, a collector is examining a recent purchase, turning it under the light, and wondering, is this the real thing? The answers are not always clear. But if we remain vigilant, informed, and united as a community, we can ensure that authenticity, real, tangible authenticity, endures. Because in the end, that is what gives every card its true value. Without it, the Pokémon TCG becomes nothing more than ink and paper. And that is something worth protecting, no matter how long the battle takes.